right, we are live. Hello, and welcome to Hall Yeah Comics. I am Nate, and today I am joined by a lot of fine friends here. To my left, on the top here, is Hagen from Lettuce Comics, and below him is Derek from Uncanny Derek Comics, and continuing around clockwise, we've got Jacob from Bone Claws Comics. So thank you everybody for coming here today and hanging out. We decided we were going to focus on continuity. So before we get started, I want to say hi to anybody who is in the chat, which I just saw Jab there. Hello. Look, Lettuce Comics is commenting as well. There's Matt from Matt Likes Comics. Hey, Matt, and Harper. So thank you guys for coming and watching. I really appreciate that. And if you're watching in the rerun, I appreciate that too. If you do not subscribe to anybody who you see up here, please give them a chance. I don't invite them on here to talk to them because they're not awesome. So I wanted to start here with continuity. I don't think it was like there was an early day in comic book reading where when you would read a book and they referenced a major event or something that happened in another book, there'd always be that little editor's note at the bottom telling you what issue and what book that happened in. So I'm reading Daredevil and they're talking about something and you get the little editor's note from Stan Lee that's like, read all about it in Amazing Spider-Man 112. So
that's a great Stan Lee.
That was spot on.
Okay. True story. Stan Lee and I have the exact same birthday. My birthday is the same as Stan Lee. Like when you look up celebrity birthdays, his was one of the only ones that came up that I knew who they were.
December 26th or something. Or
December 28th.
Yeah.
And
you look really good for your age.
You know that.
I got a photo of him on the wall.
Yeah, he's a Stan Lee stan, if you know what I mean.
Yikes.
Hey, Doug and Richard. Thanks for being here, guys. So like in those early days, and I don't know if that's Silver Age because DC, they did it a lot in the 70s and 80s too, where, you know, you would get those editor's notes and it was kind of fun. So in the letter columns of old Marvel comics, if you found a continuity error, they would send you the no prize. You guys ever hear that?
Yes.
I mean, Hagen, I know you're young. Or
yes.
Jacob.
I haven't heard of it.
But they were in the back of in the letters, and they'd say, you know, like, oh, I found in this one you said that the Thing had gone to this place, but he didn't go to that place. He went to this other place. Do I get a no prize? And they would literally send you an empty envelope. Marvel would, if they awarded you the no prize. And I've seen people have the envelopes before, but you know,
worth $100.
Yeah,
if you have one in good condition. Yeah.
Wow.
So those kind of continuity things were really kind of fun. You know, the editors did a good job of keeping things together and telling you where things were. And the fans got a chance to, you know, write in with the little things that they saw. But I just wonder, like, when did comic book continuity become this thing that became unwieldy to the point that they were constantly having to rewrite and retcon and pretend that things didn't happen? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Probably after your average lifespan.
You know, I think that's where Secret Wars comes in, and that was in the late 80s, because that was the first real big superhero team up, and that was like the first, like Marvel always had crossovers happening, like their whole universe was, how it got founded, everything was connected. But I think Secret Wars was really the first big company-wide crossover where every single book was affected by one main story. And if you wanted to get all the stories, you had to keep up with Secret Wars. And I think that's where things started to go off the rails. As good as Secret Wars was, I think that's where things really started to go crazy, because the Secret Wars 2 came out and it got even more ridiculous. And I know it directly affected many books in somewhat a negative way, but I don't know, that's my take.
Okay.
I think that you're right, and that's when it started to become unwieldy. But it didn't become apparent, I don't think, until the very first comic book internet message board. Because before then, like, you had to actually read the things in order to know what was going on, and you had to read them carefully to know what was wrong. But once the collective minds of planet Earth became a hive mind, every single little thing got pointed out, and nerds love to find things that are wrong. So
Yeah.
once we all pooled our resources, I think it was pretty much just a wrap from them.
You know, that's funny that you said message boards, because I was also thinking, like, in the 90s, which was that stupid explosion, you know, Spider-Man had 5 books, Superman had 5 books, Batman had 5 books. And when you have characters with that much going on, it's really hard to control. You know, it was probably a lot easier thinking back to those older books, which is mainly what I read anyway. When I see the advertisement for, you know, you can order these books and get a subscription. When you look at those subscription pages, there's only like, you know, 12, 15 books. And, you know, think about how many books they put out in the you know, late 80s all the way up until the 2000s. How many more titles were coming out than they were? So I don't, yeah. And then what about a long timeline? The longer these characters exist in a universe, the more things are going to happen to them from different writers, and we're not always going to like that.
Yeah, that sliding time scale as well. That always we'll probably talk about with our books too. But like that was a lot of continuity things that had to be addressed. You know, like the X-Men are still technically, well, the main original X-Men are no longer teenagers, but I mean, arguably they are still kind of young in their mid 20s, despite being born in, or they're being created in 1963, being in their, you know, mid teens at that point. So it's they have to adjust it for the audience, for the timeline, for the world where it's in. And I know Marvel did that. It was Bendis brought back the original X-Men into modern times, and it was, you know, an older Cyclops now with this younger Cyclops and Jean Grey and Iceman, and it's just this whole, you know, they were so innocent and young, and then you're reading these characters, these young X-Men in 2018 or 2017, maybe it's earlier than that, I can't remember. But then you go back and read the books from the 60s, and they're two completely different people, like chatting. It's to try and even make the continuity work with that is insane, but that's comics.
The two characters that I think of when I think of like Marvel's sliding time scale is it's Captain America, but it's also Punisher. So with Cap, if you read his very first issue, he comes out like 20 years after World War II, and then in the 80s, it's 40 years after World War II, and then it keeps on keeping on. And so you don't really know, like, the date that he came out of the ice. The date that he went in never changes, but the date that he came out keeps getting pushed further and further up the road. And with Punisher, it says that I think in his first story, it talks about how he was a Vietnam vet. And then in his next, 20 years later, it talks about how he was an Iraq war vet. And now he's a war on terror vet. And so it's just tough, especially because Marvel doesn't have the luxury that DC has, where DC exists in a fictional universe. They live in Gotham. They live in Metropolis. They don't live in New York. They don't live in Chicago. So because Marvel heroes exist in this world, they're also anchored to real life events, and that can be even more shackling.
Yeah.
I think that's very true. I had actually never thought of that aspect of the two different companies' universes, that, you know, Marvel is more grounded in the real world. I want to say hi to Roscoe. I lost his text, but Roscoe jumped in here. So, hey, Roscoe, thanks for jumping in, bud. I like that Jab is making some connections to bad continuity and bad Star Wars movies. Greedo shot first, and the special edition of Return of the Jedi is basically unwatchable. I know Tarek will enjoy that. You made me think of, with the war moving back, the Vietnam War, and then this war, you made me think about The Simpsons. Like, the longer The Simpsons has gone on, when Homer and Marge met, it was the 70s, you know, in the early episodes, and they keep pushing that back. There's even a more recent episode where it's like the late 90s and Homer's in a grunge band or something. So it makes sense that they're doing that. But at the same time, like, I don't know where that balance is between history and whatever, but does that matter? Does it matter which war Punisher fought in, as long as the result is the same and he ends up with the same drive for revenge and dealing with crime?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It really depends on the character, and like Punisher's background isn't entirely grounded that he's a Vietnam vet, and same with Iron Man. Like he's a Vietnam War vet, but then obviously that got moved, and obviously in the movie he's different. Magneto is a Holocaust survivor, and that is important because it defines his character. And Captain America is a World War II vet because that defines his character. When he gets out of the ice isn't entirely relevant. As long as they stay to those true facts, then I feel it doesn't really matter. It kind of makes the stories more exciting too, because if you were writing it, like that's a fun challenge to try and tackle. If I was given, hey, Derek, write X-Men and do a story about Magneto, like I have to now work in these very bizarre confines where I have this character who technically should be over 100 years old, but he's not. But he also has, like, I have to know my World War II history, but also it's 2024, and that's fun, that's exciting, and if it's done right, then it makes a good story. But I can babble on too much about that.
I think a lot of times the problem is it's not done right, and they try to do something. I feel like, especially when they undo something that they jacked up earlier, it's never a satisfying return, but you're just happy that you're back to that status quo that you wanted in the first place. So,
and this is going to be a perfect segue. Well, I didn't bring it up, but
go for it.
Being a big Wolverine fan, I quit reading Wolverine after the Death of Wolverine series, though that 4 or 5 issue, because I'm like, that's a good conclusion. He died. He's encased in adamantium. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read it, came out like 10 years ago, so sorry. But he's encased in adamantium. He's done. It's over. But somehow they bring him out and they give him new powers. I'm like, this is dumb. It was good. I mean, you're not going to keep a solid gold character like Wolverine out of comic books. He just makes too much money. But, you know, they bring him back and now he has new powers, and you change the core character, and it was bad. And then they changed it right back soon after that because it was terrible.
He had the fire claws or something, right?
Right, made no sense.
Yeah,
made no sense.
Oh, they were of fire. They were like heated claws.
They're like heated,
like lightsabers.
Yeah.
Now out of this.
Oh my god, that I don't know what that is, and it sounds horribly amazing.
Yeah, right.
So no, I'm sorry, Jacob. I know it pains you, but I wanted to ask you specifically a Wolverine question that I don't know the answer to. So I'm just like generally aware. There was a time where like they drew Wolverine so jacked up, he was like feral.
Yes.
His face was different, and he was I don't remember what had happened, but I feel
so that was a direct result of him losing his adamantium. And Professor Xavier, sorry, I'm tired, so I'm kind of running off of caffeine right now. Professor Xavier explained it as the adamantium was hindering his evolution. And once the adamantium was removed, his evolution kind of went into overdrive, and his healing factor got super powerful, and he went more animalistic, more like a Wolverine, and like he got to the point where he was completely feral. Like he lost his nose, he was stronger, he was faster, he was like thicker, more like the animal. And they wrote that into like the whole storyline, but then they, of course, retconned it. He got his adamantium back, I want to say, from Apocalypse.
Correct.
So he reverted back to the Wolverine he was.
I just remember seeing somebody's video talking about it, that the transition from feral to right back to normal was like so fast because the whole thing was done so poorly. They just needed to get it back.
In my opinion, because I read those that in the last few years, they were going good with it for a short time, but they just went way too far with it. Like if they would have stuck in a certain pace with his de-evolution or evolution, I think it would have been, really good, had really good potential. But they took it to the extreme and just made him not the character that he was that made him likable. So, and it just, yeah, they that was a needed retcon.
Yeah. So that's a good jumping point here for me. I actually, and I talk about this book all the time, so I'm not going to go into minutia, but Crisis on Infinite Earths, the big DC crossover that streamlined DC's universe. I think this was a great idea at the time. Like, where they were, everything was completely unwieldy. So then after Crisis came out and all the events happened, certain heroes died, spoiler, Barry Allen Flash, he died. Wally takes up the mantle. Then they released this 2-volume set, also by Marv Wolfman and George Perez, called History of the DC Universe. And it's not really a comic. It's almost like a history book with comic book pictures that literally takes you from the Big Bang, in the DC universe as it stood. So like when the DC universe starts, and takes you all the way through all these different characters and time periods that existed on different Earths, but now how they fit into the new streamlined DC universe that they had created. I mean, even like Kamandi, the last boy on Earth, and Anthro and all the cave people. So like they literally go through all these things. And when did Superman actually arrive from Krypton, and how did that happen? So they set this like this essentially a Bible. They set themselves a baseline for, this is where we're jumping on. This is where what has happened in our universe up until now. And now we're going to tell stories starting from here. And it just didn't take that long for it to get just as big and convoluted and messy, even though they put all this work into making it that way. And I was hoping Matt would be here, because he is my like DC encyclopedia. He knows so much about DC comic book history. But so I don't like, even when everybody worked together and they spent all this time to make things right, it just doesn't take long for, again, Superman having 5 books, Batman having 5 books, and everybody crossing over. Somebody else in the chat, I think it was Jab, talking about how it was Richard. Like Richard said, if we didn't have continuity, would it be easier? If we didn't have all these big crossovers, would it be easier to write stories with better, stricter continuity? I think so.
I don't necessarily think so, but it depends on how you look at them. Like if you look at the history of Spider-Man as one unbroken thing, and every single issue that he's ever appeared in has a solid confirmed place in his timeline, God, no, it's not going to work. But if you look at the appearances that he makes in other people's books as one-offs that happened whenever, or these things happened whenever, I feel like it gets easier. I started reading comic books by not like reading trades, not reading in a series. I've said this before, but my dad would give me like $5-10 when we happened to go by a comic book store, and I would go to the dollar bin, because then I could get 5 or 10 books. I didn't care about like the more expensive stuff for the most part. So I would get a random issue of Iron Man, a random issue of Captain America, a random issue of Spider-Man, and read it as one story. So anything that happened before or after, I didn't care. It didn't affect what was happening in between that cover. And so I think that if you read it like that, if you allow yourself to tell one story, and not care about the stuff that's happening outside of what you have control of, I think that's a more relaxing way to read comic books. You don't have to know what Silver Surfer is doing in order to know, what Captain America got up to this week.
So that reminds me, there was Secret Avengers was a storyline, and I want to say it was Ed Brubaker who wrote it. Wrote the latter half of it, because it was the first like 12 or 13 issues were a storyline, and it was by a different writer. And then Brubaker took over. I couldn't be mistaken who it was. And every issue was a one-shot, and it was all self-contained stories. And they were so good. And it was about certain characters, but it still involved the team, and it didn't involve the outside universe, so to speak, at all. It was just so nice to be self-contained, and I haven't come across many modern Marvel stories that do that anymore, because they always seem to get pulled in to a major event. And it's very rare where a major event affects a book in such a way that actually it makes the book better. But even then, it does take a certain type of writer that does it. And the only thing that comes to mind is in Peter David's X Factor, where in his later run in the 2000s or 2010s, there was the House of M storyline, which, long story short, no more mutants. There was a character who was created in that. I think Bendis wrote that story, but it was named Butterfly, or she was Layla Miller, and she knows
Layla
stuff.
Miller.
And Peter David took her on. And that was a crossover that happened in the House of M major crossover. And she became a solid character with Multiple Man and the whole X Factor series. And the X Factor series is phenomenal on its own.
It's amazing.
It is.
It's what I mean. It's the X-Men book that I read back in the day, because, like you just said, it was on its own just one of the most solid team books I've ever read.
Yeah, and then this crossover happened. It got pulled into another universe, but he still was able to take one of those characters, pull it back, and just put the blinders on. Like, okay, forget the rest of you, Marvel Universe, and they do have cameos. There's a later issue where J. Jonah Jameson shows up, and it's not directly affecting Spider-Man stories at all with him in there. It just worked for the story, and that kind of stuff is great. Anyway.
And think about how hard it is for an X-Man, somebody writing an X book, to keep their book out of all the nonsense in the X-Men universe of crossovers or in the greater Marvel universe of crossovers.
Well, that was a book of rejects, for sure.
Yeah, and that's the kind of teams I love. I was a pretty heavy Marvel reader during the first Civil War, the first Civil War crossover. I was reading a lot of Marvel books, and Civil War itself, I liked. The crossover aspect of it, bleeding into all these other books, is actually what caused me to drop a lot of books I was reading at the time, because it just became the only thing happening for so many months. It was almost a year, it seemed like. And every book had the special Civil War, trade dress on it.
Yeah.
And it really was just it was a slog to read books that up until then I was really enjoying. One in particular, Jacob, is Wolverine. That run during that time was really well done. Speaking of a character who was allowed to just kind of stay in one lane and tell stories about him and ignore the fact that he was on about 10 teams at that time. He was on the New Avengers. He was also on X-Men and probably the other X-Men.
X-Force, and he had his own single issue. So
yes.
He had his own, he was a busy man.
And they reference that in their books too. Like every so often, it's like, how do you do with all this Spider-Man or Wolverine? They're like, just what I do.
Right.
Okay. Cool.
But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. That it just go back to and that's the balance for the nerd. What do we want? We want a good story, and we also want this big cohesive universe, but we also want to be pissed off when you mess it up. And we're asking the impossible of these writers, to keep all of that together. But I want to complain about some things in continuity that we don't like. And if you're in the chat and you have a particular continuity issue, a retcon, some major drastic change that was done to a character, I definitely want to hear it. But does anybody here have something that they want to? I have a couple, and Derek, I know you said you brought a stack of books, but if anybody's got something they want to bring up specifically, I definitely have a couple examples of things that really have driven me crazy.
Well, I can just tell you my solution to that, before we get into the problems, which is
reading.
No.
Cancel the whole hobby.
The thing about it is, if you want to talk about, let's talk about Wolverine. Wolverine has his own book, and he's on a billion different teams. I don't want him to not be on those teams, because I like Wolverine. He's not my favorite, but I do like Wolverine. I like seeing him in stuff, but it does get difficult. So I just look at every book as its own thing. And to me, the history of that universe is the history of the main team. So the Avengers storyline is the storyline of the Marvel universe, because it pretty much encompasses everything. Justice League is the same way. I know that there are offshoots of that, but as a rule of thumb, that's how I look at it. So, I mean, that's how I rationalize it. I know that that's not how it's treated, but I feel like if it were, like if Marvel and DC both said the only thing that we're going to care about like strict continuity with as far as like crossovers and character appearances and stuff is the main team. That's what we're going to focus on. If they did that and then let writers take individual characters and do whatever they wanted with them, or do like and then do like Avengers one shots, Justice League one shots, then you have your universe, you have that through line, but you also get to see your favorite characters do different things, have exciting different storylines. So I mean that's the way that I rationalize it. That's the way that I read it, because again, that's just influenced by how I collected books as a kid. But yeah, that's how I get around it, and I kind of wish that that's the way that they treated it, because they sort of half do and half don't.
Well, once again,
I wish that they would just pick a side.
You are being too rational, and you need to stop it and up your nerd rage.
I don't like being angry. I like being excited about things.
I agree with you, and so we even said in the pre, like we were hanging out just a little bit before we went live, and we said, we'll just skip one more day. That's too easy. That's shooting a fish in a barrel. But I will have an unpopular opinion in this. Like, I think One More Day could have been a great story if it was this like moment for Peter to come to some kind of realization about that people in his life are going to die, or whatever it was, that he had to make this unbearable choice. And if he would have learned some lesson and moved forward from it, awesome. Like, they could have done something with it, but instead they just broke up a marriage because the devil wanted the marriage. And that is like, that's not great writing, in my opinion. Like, nothing happened to Peter because of it. It just started him over in different ways. He didn't grow from it. So I don't know. They're still doing it, and I still hate it. I don't read Amazing Spider-Man or Spider-Man, haven't in a while, but I like when my characters grow. So Peter getting married, I think, is kind of cool. When I look at the Into the Spider-Verse movies, and there's Peter B. Parker who's got the baby, that's a cool stage. And I kind of like when that happens. Wally West, when he became the second Flash, he had, he had kids. The kids had superpowers, and they're dealing with that. And then that was one of the things I wrote down. I mean, at one point, Wally West was completely erased. His family was completely forgotten. They just erased this entire character. And I have 250 some issues of his run, and DC just told me, it doesn't matter. He's gone. he literally never existed in the universe that we've got now. So I think even something as bad as One More Day doesn't have to be as bad. It's just like when it falls flat like it did, and just angers people. Like, they were like, what did the fan get out of that? And what did the character get out of that? Nothing.
And that's I'm going to segue into a book here. So
go for it.
That's the thing about editorial, and editorial really needs to. They're the ones that kind of make those decisions. The writers can come up with ideas, but editorial, and at that point, Joe Quesada was the editorial of Marvel. He was the editor-in-chief, and he wrote those stories to make that happen. And those people have to answer or be answered to by the fans. And so that brings me to my first book, and I saw somebody mention this earlier. And this first book, this is actually Dark Horse Comics, guys. We're going here.
What?
So I decided to do one non-Marvel or one X-Men book here. And this book, or this run here, was dramatically changed by a slew of editors that ended up making it significantly better. And it's Star Wars. So this is the Star Wars. And this is, there we go. This is there's an 8-issue comic book run that is the original script George Lucas wrote for Star Wars. And it is a train wreck of a story. And this is legit. They had the rights to make this story. And the difference between what happens in this book and what happens in the actual movie is night and day. So Luke Skywalker is the Obi-Wan character in this story. Anakin Starkiller is the Luke Skywalker character in the story, but Luke's also a Jedi general. The Sith exist, and they're the bad guys. Han Solo is a green alien. He doesn't have a Wookiee friend. Yavin at the end of the movie, or at the end of the story, Yavin 4, where the Rebel base is, that's where the Wookiees live, and the Wookiees come and fight against the Sith at the end. It's a complete train wreck of a story. It's convoluted. It's a mess. And this is where editorial can make good changes, because this story never would have become the phenomenon that it was until somebody came in and edited the book and edited the script to make this become something incredible. So this is actually issue number 0. Then there's 1 to 8. But yeah, I wanted to kind of just derail the entire conversation.
Oh, that's cool.
About Star Wars.
I didn't know that. We're just going to stay in this view here, I think, because I was actually watching someone else's stream, and there's something going on with StreamYard tonight. So like our view is not what the audience view is. And I saw that on someone else's stream. So that's why everyone's saying they can't see. So I must have I thought I made you, the center of attention, Derek, but apparently it shrunk you down. So
story of my life. They should have stopped at issue 0. Yeah, absolutely, Rich.
That is funny. Okay. So here's one of the ones. This makes me unreasonably angry. But I think no, I take that back. I think it makes me reasonably angry. So this is Countdown to Infinite Crisis. And I don't even really remember the storyline or anything, and I don't care, because DC was doing a crisis like every summer anymore at this point. But what drove me crazy in this one was, and this is my most hated kind of continuity thing, and I think everybody can probably think of an example where the hero or the character does a complete 180 on the person that they've been their entire career, every time you've ever seen them, because the whole time they've secretly been X. So in this, Maxwell Lord, who is a guy who started the Justice League International with Blue Beetle and Booster Gold, and it was the goofy, fun era, and everybody laughed. Well, the thing is, he was secretly a checkmate agent, so like a secret agent for a government agency that was like Amanda Waller. And at the end of this issue, spoiler alert, he shoots Ted Kord, the Blue Beetle, one of my favorite characters and one of his best friends up until now, in the head. And now Ted Kord is dead. So right before this happens, and they literally show you right on the cover that Batman is holding Blue Beetle dead. But nowhere is it ever hinted that he is like, okay, Matt. and yes, Richard, I thought of Secret Empire as well, which I know will get somebody's blood raging. I don't agree that there were always signs with Maxwell Lord. He was always a schemer. He was always dirty. But there were several issues of that where he was written by Keith Giffen as somebody who wanted to be a better person. So the idea that he would shoot this person who was one of his best friends and somebody that he was on a team with for so long was just like a total 180. And there's a lot of examples of that. And then, this was not popular. I can't remember what they did with Max Lord, how they brought him back, but the like Blue Beetle came back during Blackest Night. He came back as one of the Black Lanterns, and then Ted Kord got revived. And so I don't know. That's just one of my most hated kind of wouldn't it be clever if Hagen, wouldn't it be clever if Captain
I'm so glad
America?
You asked. So I hate that so much that I actually got up to get a comic book to show. Like I actually moved my lazy ass out of this chair to get something. That's how important this is to me.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I just
it's
like, wow.
It's
He's
never
standing.
For those of you that are not familiar with the Secret Empire storyline as it pertains to Captain America, Captain America fights the Iron Nail. Who's that? It's not important. Captain America loses his super soldier serum. How does that happen? It's not important. There's a character called Kobik, basically the sentient cosmic cube, and she gives Captain America back all of his powers, essentially, right? Makes him young again, yada yada yada. So then, after that, this book comes out.
Oh.
This is Steve Rogers, Captain America, #1, written by Nick Spencer. So, I'm sure Nick Spencer is a great guy. I'm sure he pays his taxes.
You're so nice.
He's probably helped old ladies across the street. I'm sure he's a wonderful person. He's also, I know he did like a Spider-Man run that was apparently pretty good. I don't know anything about that. But yeah, this was a big old swing and a miss, because if you don't know about Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, the co-creators of Cap, they are both Jewish Americans, and they created Captain America as like a big old middle finger to Hitler. And his very first cover was him punching Hitler in the jaw. Like it doesn't get more I don't like Nazis than that. So what Nick Spencer decided to do, and I guess with the blessing of Marvel editorial, was to say that from the beginning, Captain America has always been an agent of Hydra, essentially a Nazi. And so his arc through Secret Empire is trying to assume power over the United States for the sake of Hydra and himself. He gets Sam Wilson to kill a man. It's just...
What?
Yeah, so the whole thing with that is that he and Sam are in a fight. Sam throws his shield and accidentally kills a man. And later on, you realize, or Captain America's talking, Steve Rogers is talking, and says, like, I know that shield so well that I maneuvered Sam exactly to where he needed to be, to where I knew he would make the mistake that he made. It's like a very Batman-y thing, but whatever. Yeah, sure. But yeah, so I don't know how this ties into how I feel about continuity, but when people bring up Secret Empire, I'm like the Manchurian Candidate. Like, I just activate, and I go on a murder spree. I cannot
Was it legit? It was legit continuity in Marvel. Like they said,
so, it is legit continuity, because old Steve Rogers ends up coming back because Kobik essentially has a change of heart, which is, again, really stupid, but essentially comes back, beats the hell out of, he's called Stevel as a joke, but that was, Stevel was Steve Rogers' original body. That was the original character. This new Captain America is technically a whole new character. And Steve Rogers, the Hydra one, this is so dumb. The Hydra one ends up becoming the new Flag Smasher, and we haven't heard from him in forever. Yeah, but I guess that's how I'll tie it back to continuity. Okay. If you pick up an issue of Captain America now, you don't know that, and you don't care, and it does not matter. Don't think about it. It's okay. I don't. Actually, fun fact, this is the only book of this run that I have in a bag and board. All the other ones I just have in bags because I'm punishing them.
Is that Steve McNiven cover, by the way? I can just, like, it looks like a Steve McNiven cover.
I think it's Jesus Says. I think. That's who the artist was on this book. Okay. I can open it up and see.
Don't do that. Don't give it. Oh yeah, you're actually gonna give it some oxygen. That may deteriorate the book quicker.
Yes. It's gonna prolong its suffering, is what it's gonna do.
Why? It just looks like it.
Derek, I know you said you brought a stack. You got something else you can rage about on tonight's?
Oh sure, yeah.
Tonight's continuity hate.
I have things I could like. So somebody brought up Nightcrawler earlier, and I brought so many books just to like kind of dink around with. But I mean, who did the cover? You find out?
It's got 4 people on here, and I'm not sure any of them are right. So the artist is Jesus Says.
Okay.
And then it says cover: Steve Epting, Jim Steranko,
That's
Paul Renaud, Jeffrey Vareggi, and Scotty Young.
Steve Epting would have done that. Yeah. That's an Epting cover. Sorry, McNiven is not. Is McNiven a writer? I can't remember now.
No, I'm sorry.
the
I'm sorry. God, this
No,
is
Mc-
really dumb.
McNiven's
The
an
cover
artist.
is Jesus Says.
Okay.
Steve Epting did
Okay.
a variant cover.
Very good.
This is one of those Steve Harvey envelope situations. That's not a relevant reference anymore, is it?
I still understood it.
I love the name Stevel so much.
Yeah. I hate that stupid run. It's awful. It's really awful. It's genuinely terrible.
All right, Derek, tell us all about Nightcrawler and his family tree.
Oh my God, guys, Chuck Austin's storyline. Oh man. So long story short, everybody knows. Well, people should know that Mystique is Nightcrawler's mom. And this
What?
is, yeah, I know, right? Nightcrawler's part of the X-Men too. This is Nightcrawler, by the way. This is a book. This is a comic.
It's got pages.
Yeah, I think so. I haven't actually opened it from the bag. So this book here is the retcon of Nightcrawler's father, which we learn is Azazel. And Azazel is a demon and tricked and impregnated Mystique. And Mystique's character is so out of character in the story to make it work. And the Azazel character, so this kind of was like, well, then Nightcrawler's not whole mutant, he's part demon because Azazel's a demon. And this became, a big shaker in the storyline, and Azazel kind of got thrown to the sides because this was so convoluted and stupid that nobody really cared. And then somehow X-Men First Class was like, hey, let's put Azazel in the movie. Like, the whole thing was dumb. So this retcon got retconned just recently. And if you aren't familiar with the most recent storyline, so Mystique has always had a pseudo, like Chris Claremont's original storylines, there's a lot of innuendo in it. And there's always a suggestion that Mystique and Destiny were a couple. And what ended up happening was that the newest retcon is that Mystique is Nightcrawler's father because she can shapeshift. And so that's the kind of weird, and they kind of just threw the whole Azazel thing out the window.
So
And
who's the mom?
So wait, Nightcrawler is Beyonce then, because that means he's Destiny's child.
Get out.
You can kick me out. You have that power.
Oh, that's
The only one laughing is Nate, really. All right, well, now that that's done, my next book is so, and yeah, it just becomes a big, it's just, yeah. That's it's a retcon of a retcon.
So
really none of it is necessary at all to
but
begin with.
I don't get it. Is Mystique the mom and the dad? Is she like one of those
That was
flatworms
my
that
question.
can...
I think Destiny's the mom.
Oh,
Makes the most sense.
A
But-
mutant and another mutant love each other very much.
Right. Good
Yeah.
Lord.
It's a mess. It's
I
a
lo-
mess.
Doug, I think you nailed it on the head. That's a turd burger.
Yeah, and it's like, if Destiny's the mom, which she is, like that's another retcon of a retcon. And yeah, I thought about bringing up Avengers 200 and how Avengers Annual 8 were first appearance of Rogue, because that's another debacle of a storyline that I'm not going to get into. It's a Korvac saga, if I'm not mistaken. And that, I'm not going to get into that. But that's another debacle of a storyline where retcons had to be made to reverse nonsense that happened. And anyway, Nightcrawler is just a strange.
This one here that Himbo's bringing up, freaking Chuck Austin had Juggernaut hook up with She-Hulk, and I don't know anything about that. I read the She-Hulk run, and I almost went and pulled that one because I love the way that Dan Slott just kind of wrote it out, like as quickly as he could. I think it was in a panel or two, basically a better writer saying, that's dumb, so we're just going to move forward so that it's not dumb anymore. And which is probably, that was a satisfying way to deal with something that was just really completely out of character. And I don't know how Chuck Austin gets work, because everything I hear about what he writes, nobody likes. Like, it's the worst period of X-Men. It's the worst period of everything that he
But you
touches.
do hear about him,
You do. And
and
that's what.
that's how he
Sorry.
That's how he gets work.
Okay.
Well, he used to be an inker for X-Men. That was the like he kind of like John Byrne. He kind of upgraded himself as artist into writing, and that's how he got where he is. And for some reason, it's like Greg Land, man. Like nobody
Yeah.
likes him, but he just keeps getting work for whatever reason. Must be accepting the cheap paychecks or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm gonna do another DC one that I hate, and believe it or not, it's another Crisis. And Hagen pulled this one out earlier. I haven't read this in years, so I am not like up to date like with all of my knowledge. I just know that I freaking hated this story from beginning to end. This was another one that was like secretly all along, this whole thing that you didn't know was the story basically is that Dr. Light raped and murdered. Did he murder Sue Denby too? I know
Just the first one.
Yeah, okay. He
There
raped,
was no murder.
Yeah, he was a rapist, and the Justice League then brainwashed him. And so what they did was they took like the most goofy character, the elongated man, and his wife, who were a fun-loving, like, you know, kind of very D-list characters, but fun, and just turned it like so grim, dark, and gross. And throughout the story, you know, they got to have even more murders. So Tim Drake, Robin, I think it was his dad gets murdered by Captain Boomerang. And like his dad had already been through so much in the Batman comics. Like Tim's mom got poisoned and died, and his dad took the same poison and was in a wheelchair and all kinds of stuff. And so what the Justice League did was they had Zatanna use magic to brainwash Dr. Light so that he wouldn't be so evil. And then they just still let him go be a supervillain, but he just kind of fought the Teen Titans all the time, and it was really goofy. But the truth is, he was actually like this dark, horrible, gross, hateful, evil villain. And then he gets his memory back and goes crazy, hateful. It's just like, it's so stupid. There are plenty of villains that they could have used that weren't. The whole vehicle for it was dumb. I don't believe for a second that Superman would go along with that. Like, it seems so out of character to me. And it was actually Batman was the one who was so against it that they had to she had to brainwash Batman too to make him forget all this stuff.
And the thing that I think you have probably forgotten is that they do brainwash Batman because they are somehow able to subdue Batman, and they keep it a secret from Superman because they're somehow able to keep it a secret for years from Superman. But
that's right.
They also talk about it like on the same block as both of these characters. And at one point they say like, I think it's Barry Allen. I think it's Barry Allen Flash. It says like, I can't believe that Superman doesn't know. I can't believe that Batman doesn't know. And I think Green Arrow says like, you think they don't know. They hear what they want to hear. And like, I'm not a DC person. I have an appreciation for the characters, but I'm not like a DC guy. But even I know that Superman and Batman are not sticking their heads in the sand about anything at all. Like, especially if it's happening on their team with people that they trust. Like, that didn't make a lick of sense to me. That went completely against what I thought their characters were. And it was interesting to me to read Identity Crisis because it was one of the ones that they had at my local library for some reason. But I picked it up because I've heard a lot of people, specifically Ricky, talking about how Marvel couldn't get away with it. And I wanted to see what he was talking about. Turns out he's probably right.
Yeah.
But as a one shot, it's fascinating. But as a part of continuity, it's insane.
Yeah.
Like reading it, I thought it was a one shot. I am just now learning that it was not.
And it was, you know, it was the summer event. It was part of continuity. but it is, as far as I know, like I don't know that it's really referenced at all anymore, you know, because it is so out of character. It's so terrible. And you're right. Like, had they done this as a sort of like Elseworlds sort of, it's just a pocket universe or something. I still think this point is very good, that Sue doesn't have a part in the story other than to be a victim. And that pisses me off. And I know that's, not very many people are going to say I'm a Sue Dimby fan, but I am, because she was a member of the Justice League International, because her husband was a team member. She was like administration, she was a good character in that book. And in this miniseries, she had no character other than to be a helpless damsel who was horribly assaulted.
Yeah.
So
in the panels where that happens, I'm not somebody that gets like easily squeamish about things. Yeah. But it just felt it was tasteless and disrespectful.
It is gross. Like, and that is the note I wrote here, because I wrote down identity crisis, and my only note is gross. The whole thing is gross. Nobody's characters make sense, but they're trying to tell us that these are the same characters you've been reading this whole time. It's just this terrible dark thing has happened. And I'm with you. I don't buy it. And that's why it didn't stick. This is one of those that didn't land.
And that's something that it's something to tell about good storytelling. I always reference Jim Shooter had a blog about a storytelling lecture, and the general gist of it was that he uses Little Miss Muffet as the basis of this, or that as a good story. So Little Miss Muffet's a good story. And so you have Little Miss Muffet sitting on her tuffet, eating her curds away. There's your status quo. You have Little Miss Muffet, your main character. She's what she's doing, and sitting and eating. Along came a spider, built your suspense, sat down beside her. There's your climax, and then scared Little Miss Muffet away. And there's your status quo change. And I haven't read the story you're talking about, but it sounds like the villain's still the villain, and this just makes him a little extra gross. But it didn't actually change anything for anyone, and that is poor storytelling, in my opinion, because it literally, the story existed just to add more character to an already bad character. And it didn't add anything, and it didn't change any status quo. So what's the point of the story?
I don't want to. I don't want to spoil anything. There is one. I don't know what comes after this. I haven't read anything after this, but there is one thing that maybe, Nate, you can speak to that does change after this story.
I mean, again, no, it's been so long since I read it, and because I hated it so much, like, this just went in a box, this just went in the file, not to come out. I don't know if Matt's still here or Himbo. I know both of those guys know a lot of DC, and you can go ahead and say if you know something.
Well, I'm looking back through the chat, and Himbo actually just said it. Himbo, great name, by the way. Yeah, so it turns out that instead of the villain being the cape killer, or the whole story centers around the significant others of superheroes dying. Instead of Dr. Light or anybody like that being the killer, it was the wife of the Atom, who was killing everyone semi-accidentally, like literally almost a Three Stooges bit, and then she had to start killing more people to cover up her mistakes. So like I don't know if maybe that changed anything, but even at that point, it's the wife of the Atom. It's not like they turned Lois Lane into a murderer. So
yeah,
I don't know. Sorry, Harper.
The only Dr. Light I know is from Mega Man, so this is like news to me.
Well, Harper, you should still read Crisis on Infinite Earths. Just stay away from Infinite Crisis and Identity Crisis, and Final Crisis wasn't great either.
No way you could mix any of those up.
No. I mean, Secret Wars, Secret Invasion.
Crisis is pretty good.
Midlife Crisis is hell on earth. Let me tell you why.
Midlife Crisis got you that Alex Ross Superman behind you, so I don't want to hear it.
I love my Alex Ross Superman standee.
Right, so I want to talk about something now, because I don't get to talk about DC very much, being big in Wolverine. But I want to talk about the New 52. And like a lot of people, the New 52 is what kind of got me back into comics when it launched. And, I was, making some adult money at the time, so I was able to actually get a pull list again. And it's what kind of got me back. And Batman and New 52 was probably, peak. Everybody loves Scott Snyder's Batman. And the writing is great, the art is great. But he kind of broke one of the cardinal rules of handling a character, especially a big character like this. And I brought this book out because I really like the cover. But Joker has no friggin' face.
Yeah.
His face was torn off and stapled on, which was kind of cool, but he lost his whole face. Like, there's no face on him anymore. So he's like maimed. And here's another cover with Joker's daughter where she stole his face and put it on hers. Pretty cool. But I don't know what happened after that. Like, I know the Joker had his face back, but like it was left field. I mean, I like what he did with the character, I like the story, but I'm like, you took the man's face off.
Yeah. It's, and I was gonna say that too, and this is, I am a DC fan, but I don't know the continuity of, we had Countdown and then New 52, and we had Rebirth and Convergence, and what's the one that there's a new name they've got for whatever it is that's current right now. There was a relaunch of Green Lantern and Flash and Wonder Woman, and all of those came with a new #1, and they had a particular, I can't even remember, but I don't fully understand if New 52 started and then Rebirth started again, or is Rebirth building on what came before? There's just, DC does it so much more than Marvel does. I feel like they're always kind of, and Scott Snyder, I do like that run, but again, it didn't pay. There were like, I didn't understand what they were picking and choosing with Batman, like what history had already happened, because it felt like a very, a new start. But I didn't know which Robins were still, was Jason Todd still there somewhere as a former Robin, or was he something else completely different?
And that's one thing I discovered with
Dawn of DC.
Yeah, is it depends on what character you're talking about. Because like Batman, I think was like a reboot, whereas Green Lantern was not. Like, and I was going to talk about this because this is, in my opinion, continuity done right. Jeff Johns' Green Lantern, for like a decade or longer, the same writer, a decade or longer storyline that doesn't change, doesn't stop, doesn't retcon a whole lot. And then the New 52 came, and he's still writing his stories, and it doesn't change very much at all because he's continuing his storyline. So whereas Batman may have changed and some of the Batman characters changed a lot, Green Lantern kind of didn't.
And, Jeff Johns' run, he did so much good things. He laid so much awesome groundwork, and a lot of that is still going on. Those things were so good. They were added to the mythology, the different colors, the whole spectrum, and Blackest Night, Brightest Day. All of those things worked. So they're almost like the antithesis of what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah.
And you're right. It was a good through line for a lot of those things, that even though all this stuff is swirling around it, he was still just telling a really solid story in his pocket of the universe.
Yeah. And that's one of the great things about Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run is if you've never read Green Lantern, just start there. You don't have to read any of the old stuff at all, because really the best of Green Lantern is Jeff Johns. And he covers everything you could want to know about the character and the universe of Green Lantern and all the Lanterns.
Oh, here we go. Somebody's got themselves a nice flow chart. I think I can agree with that. Except I don't know about Future State. I might flip that in Dawn of DC. I might like what's coming out now a little better than the few Future States I've read. But so let's talk about that for just a minute. It is annoying that things get rebooted and that we constantly get new #1s, but is it too daunting for somebody? If somebody was interested in coming into the hobby and they looked and they saw Spider-Man was on issue 789, are they going to back off of that, or are they more likely to jump on something with a lower number that feels like they can get caught up?
So I have a few hot takes on this.
Yay.
I miss gatefold comics because those were
I'm sorry. That's not the sentence I expected.
good.
That's not
So-
exactly the hottest take I've ever heard.
I miss gatefold comics. Do you remember lenticular covers?
So, guys, hear me out here.
Okay. Sorry.
It's all good. It's maybe not the hottest take. You're right. But for those who are unaware, gatefold comics were you'd open up the book and then it would fold out again. And a lot of books in the 90s, especially, and going a little bit into the 2000s, had these gatefold comics. And what they did is they used that space to get readers caught up. And
yes.
for me,
Yes.
as a child of the 90s who didn't know any of the things established from the 70s and 80s reading X-Men, this was a great little guide for me to go, oh, that's who everybody is. That's what's been going on. I see where things are going now. And that is decent. Now, I already mentioned Jim Shooter, and I'll mention him again. He used to have in the 80s, and why a lot of people hated him, writers hated him, was because he always tried to make every issue within the first page or two, everybody establish themselves, and the status quo gets established for everybody to get caught up. So they didn't have to read the previous issue. They could jumpstart right in the main issue. And obviously, writing has evolved a lot in comics, and to do that isn't a viable thing. But having these exposition bits in the front page of a book is helpful. That all being said, I find, like Jonathan Hickman with his X-Men books, I feel that has to get thrown out because there's way too many just like single, like, here, read this file that is uncovered. It is it's exposition center, and it's taking away from the comic book. And I feel that has to get removed entirely. And he's a good writer, but he needs to incorporate those interesting tidbits into the story rather than just, here's a blank sheet of white, read what's going on in the middle of the book, and then at the end there's another one. So I say that all to say, I don't remember where we're going. Yeah, what were we talking about?
Well,
I like gatefolds.
We were talking about new number one issues, and
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Like how
So
to
if you
get
jump at 700, issue 700 for Spider-Man, then it doesn't matter because you can get caught up. And as a kid, I was like, oh, this is X-Men number 300 something. Like, I don't know anything before this, but it was still like, hey, I know this is a character named Chamber. Okay, I don't know who Chamber is. I didn't read Generation X, but here he is in Uncanny X-Men. And okay, I'm following along. I see what's going on. The first page gave me... Go on.
I was just going to say, I think we've already found a perfect solution to this. And I know that DC did this back in the 90s because I have a few DC comic books where I see this, but Marvel does legacy numbering where they'll have like, this is Captain America #1, but it's actually number 697. But I really enjoy that because I saw somebody earlier say that there's a new versus old reader, like how do you balance trying to maintain old readers and also get new readers? And I think legacy numbering is a really good way to do that because for old readers you get to keep the same numbering system. You know where you are in continuity, but you also have defined jumping on and jumping off points. And so if you see a new #1 come out, great, go ahead and pick that up if that's a character that you're interested in. But it also has a defined place in the order.
I also think it's a marketing gimmick, the legacy numbering, because they're keeping track. So collectors and readers are like, oh, we're getting to like issue 700 or issue 1000, which is going to be a big, oversized, overpriced book that probably has nothing special in it whatsoever. Like recently, I thought it was going to be an interesting book. I think Vampirella hit number 666. I thought, oh, they're going to do something special with that because, it was Vampirella 666. It was nothing.
Yeah, no, they're going to release 1,000 variant covers like they always do with every issue of Vampirella ever.
Right, nothing special. But there's a big books that are coming up on like milestone issues as far as the legacy numbering. So I think it's going to be it's a marketing ploy at the same time.
So
Yeah,
I
think probably so.
I'm just on my phone because I actually wrote down Uncanny X-Men has had legacy numbering. And they've had, though, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4, Volume 5, Volume 6, and they're on to Volume 7 right now of Uncanny X-Men Legacy numbering. And so Volume 4 is like issue 1 to 20, Volume 5 is issue 1 to 18, and they all have legacy numbering. But now you're like, what volume am I getting into? Because the reboots just keep happening. And legacy numbering works to a degree, but now it's like, well, which volume of Uncanny X-Men am I reading? There's literally 8 of them now.
Yeah.
And I mean, and that's coming from someone who wants to read the X-Men. If you were trying to get it, like if you were trying, I'm not making fun. I'm saying like you're having to go through effort to get to something you want. And if I'm a new reader and I watched X-Men 97 and I said, that was cool, I'm going to start reading some X-Men. And I went and looked at the X-Men wall at my local comic shop. It's daunting. It's daunting what's there. You don't know what it is. I'm like, well, where's Jubilee?
Yeah.
She's a vampire. I'm sorry.
but like, I really like what you said. I mean, I really like what you said about gatefolds, because the reason I collect more vintage books is because of something you said earlier too, Hagen. I can pick up a random book and read it, and they give me enough in that book to know what I need for that issue. They don't need to tell me the whole history up till now, but usually in books, I get the older books, you get enough to know where you are. You get to read this story and you get to the end. And of course, they're going to leave you like they always do with the soap opera-esque cliffhanger. And you're going to want to go find that other one. But if you can't find the next one and you find one that's 4 issues later, they do the exact same thing. And for any point in that story, you get your little Stan Lee editor's blurb to tell you to go and, read Amazing Spider-Man number issue 118. And you go, if you really need to know when that happened, it's there. So
I got to jump in now because Volunteer Collector mentioned Wolverine Deep Cuts.
Okay, go for it.
And I brought it to talk about because of that. Fantastic book. It just started, and like I mentioned Magic 4 Nights, I believe, privately, but this is so much better already. And the editor's notes mentioned Kitty Pryde and Uncanny X-Men from the 80s. So if you're looking at when this book falls in continuity, because this is not Krakoa era, apparently. And, it just finished, and Wolverine's about to launch his new post, Krakoa era run, but this just came out. And the only thing we have to go on as far as continuity is the editor's notes, and they're referencing 80s books. So, that's what you have to kind of, when you're trying to place these individual short stories they're doing, it's like, where do you put this in the timeline of Wolverine and, the events that happened through his storyline? You kind of have to post it with the editor's notes. Like, this is going back to the 80s.
Yeah, and like, who's the market for that book too, right? Like, that's got to be guys in their 30s or older, because
okay, older. Hi.
but I'm just guessing with you, dude. But like, that's neat that it's referencing a book in the 80s. But if I'm 18-year-old kid walking to the comic book store, I'm like, well, this references Wolverine and Kitty Pryde. Like, where do I find that? Well, at your local convention. Good luck, kid.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're gonna buy your first 80s book.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's cool. I think that's cool. I do think that's cool to like tell a cool modern story and say, here's this thing from the storied past of because this hobby is great. It does have a storied past, and to find a big event that was important at a time, to send a kid to a convention to dig through a long box to find something. Going back to, I think that's awesome. Going back to legacy numbering, both Mr. Akins and Steve don't like it. I've heard that there've been a lot of errors in the legacy numbering as well, that an issue will come out and they'll say it's a particular one and the numbers actually, I've heard that with a few Amazing Spider-Mans at least.
I've noticed that as well, even just with the books that I have. So a caveat, you could do legacy numbering, but like, get it right for the love of God.
It is,
because then I've got the wrong number on my book.
It's just counting. I mean,
yeah,
you've got 3 issue 500.
Oh, welcome to the middle-aged party, bottom tier collector. I don't want to go too much longer. I want to respect people's time, and also I did see Ricky from All Sorts of Words is going to be doing a stream at 8:30 with Jim Mint Collectibles, and I might try to catch some of that. And I think anybody who's in here, if you got time to go check that out, you should. Ricky is absolutely awesome and hilarious. So I don't know if anybody has any final thoughts. I mean, I just wanted a chance to like lovingly talk about things I don't like, because the bottom line is I still love. I'm angry about it, but I'm not, because I care about it. You know, at the end, even the ones that I can't stand, Hagen, you own a book that you absolutely hate. And
I did just throw it on the ground earlier, and it's going to stay there.
But you're not going to throw it away, and I know you're not. You're going to put it back in that cabinet.
No, because
that's what he takes out his frustrations on.
Yeah. It's tough, right? So like if I have final thoughts, I will say this. This all started off with continuity. Read what you want to read. If you hear that a story's good, if you see that it's good, read it. And don't care about whatever little issues might arise because of that. And if you view these characters as archetypes, instead of like if you view characters as having like a birth date and a social security number, and you place them at a certain point in time, it's really not going to work out. They've been around for years and years and years. But if you view them as a character archetype, if you view them as a vessel through which to tell a story, you can appreciate any story. That's what I'll say. Regardless of how the companies treat them, how you read them is much more important.
Here. Some of the best comic stories ever written have jacked up continuity. So,
and yeah, I mean, we appreciate it for what it is because they're characters or they're books that we love. But in the end, we are nerds. Like, I am that guy on the episode of The Simpsons who says, you know, that Scratchy hit the same rib twice and made two different tones. And, you know, I certainly hope someone got fired for that. And like that, every time I see that episode, I'm like, oh my God, that's my life. You know, I do that, but I'm not that, you know, but I think I'm not that bad, but I think we are. It was real easy for me to pull a list of books that I could say he hit the same rib twice.
I'm going to just jump in here. I got to show these two books because I'm hoping that either Rory Thomas or Chris Claremont are watching right now to answer this for me, because I can never get answers for it. Here's X-Men 97. This is the first appearance of Eric the Red. If anybody ever watched, like, if you ever read it, you know who he is. But if you ever watched the 90s cartoon show, Eric the Red was that Shi'ar Empire guy who wanted to kill Lilandra or capture Lilandra. They didn't want to kill anybody in the show. And got Black Tom Cassidy and the Juggernaut and Cassidy Keep and all that. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that episode or who Eric the Red is. Yes, no?
I mean, I watched it, but no.
Okay, cool.
But go on.
So this is the first appearance of Eric the Red, the Shi'ar Empire guy. This is X-Men number 51. This is from 60-something. This is also the first appearance of Eric the Red. But it's not this Eric the Red. This Eric the Red is the exact same costume as this Eric the Red, but this Eric the Red is Cyclops, and is Cyclops infiltrating Magneto and Mesmero's lair as a different mutant named Eric the Red, and anyway, he gets exposed in the next issue that he's Cyclops, and that's the last we hear of this Eric the Red. The name and the costume get recycled and reused in this, and it continues on to issue 108. I have no idea why something so specific got used twice, and there's zero explanation to any of it. Like, why is Eric the Red Cyclops, and why is Eric the Red this alien? And the guys look exactly the same, but they're not the same, and it never is addressed again. And I don't know.
So they did that specifically so you would be talking about it 60 years later.
Yeah,
but you are talking about the same rib with two different tones.
Exactly that. Exactly that. I'm like, they're both Eric the Reds, but what's going on here? It's driving me crazy. It has bothered me for years. I certainly
hope someone got fired for that.
Yeah, Roy Thomas became editor-in-chief, and Chris Claremont continued writing the story for 20 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love it. That is a great
No,
place. We're
There's no
gonna.
answer. There's nothing to love. It's just more
Okay.
anxiety and existential dread.
This conversation is not over because there are so many more things we could talk about with mischaracterizations, continuity, things that have been retconned and lost. But I want to say we consistently had like 10 people watching all night, and you guys who were in the chat chatting out, thank you so much. I'm sorry if we missed anything. Derek pulled way more books than we got to, but Derek, you're going to be invited back because you're a ton of fun, brother. So if you do not subscribe to any of these guys, I'm pretty sure I got their links in the description. If not, I will get those in there soon. So please do subscribe to everybody you see here. Thank you for being here, guys. Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it, man. Thank you to everybody who was here. Thank you to everybody who chatted out. Go check out Ricky. He's going to be on in about 15 minutes. You guys don't leave, but we will see everybody next time. So have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And yeah.